Okay guys, so I am here at school. Moose and I are. He's wandering around. It's pretty clear that we're having trouble with the How Our Ecosystems Organized project that was due last week. Okay, I'm extending it till this Friday, so please get it turned in, but I want to explain the basics. Okay, so the first thing that you should have looked at is the reading. Okay, and from the reading, you want to take down a couple of notes. So I'll just write them on the board. So if you don't have these down, write them down. Where's my whiteboard markers? Okay. Okay, so the first one is species. So I don't think I can flip this around, but we go species. And according to our reading, a group of living organisms that can breed. Oh, well, of course you can't see that. Living organisms that can breed. And I will take pictures of this at the end and attach it. Okay. The next one is population. Okay, I bolded a couple of these. And according to our reading, a population is all the individuals that interact with each other of a particular species. Okay, so group of particular species. Okay, so when we're in our class, we're a population of human beings. Okay, that makes sense? We're all the same species, and we're a population of humans. Okay, the next one would be population, community. Okay, so I'm writing community up here, and remember, I will write all these. I will take a picture and attach these. Okay, so community is all the biotic factors. Okay, biotic meaning living. Okay, biotic factors. So living things. Okay, so if we were still looking at my classroom as my habitat, right now my community would be me and Moose. Okay, we're not the same population, right? Because we're two different species, but we're interacting and he's living and I'm living. Okay, so that's that one. And then the last one is the last one. Ecosystem. Yeah, okay. Next one would be ecosystem. And that's the last one. Ecosystem. And that's living and non-living. Okay. Living and non-living elements. Okay. So biotic and abiotic. Okay. So living and non-living. Non-living. Okay. So you have your species, all things that can reproduce together. Population is a group of those species. Your community, which is all the living things, and then your ecosystem, which is living and non-living. So if we're still looking at my classroom, okay, Moose and I are community. There he is, okay, because we're both living. But if we wanted to add our ecosystem, we might add the oxygen that we're breathing, the desks, the computers, okay? That's part of our ecosystem, okay? Where's the cap to my pen? P.S. It's really sad me teaching to you guys via this way. I miss you guys, okay? So we got the reading. That's what I need you to get out of the reading. So then we flip it over. Flipping it over. And then we're looking at the questions, okay? So it's called, how is my organism related to its ecosystem? So we're gonna read through the entire assignment before we do anything, okay? Because I wanna make sure that you guys know what you're doing, So the first thing is pre-research. So you're going to pick an organism and research it. Okay, it has to be found in North America. You're going to compare its place of ecosystem. Okay, so when you're thinking about it, so you pick an organism. Let's say I pick, what's a good organism? I'll pick a moose. Okay, so let's say I pick an actual moose, not a Weimaraner, but like, an actual North American moose. And the first one, I'm looking at number 2, it says, what do you already know about the organism and its habitat? Well, things I know about moose are they're found in evergreen forests, okay? We can find them here in Washington. They're found in Alaska. Let's see what else. They're really big. They eat vegetation. I know that about them, right? So those are the things I would put down for number 2. So what do you already know about your organism? Okay. Oh, it also needs water. Might put that on there. Okay. So then I'm looking at this. So it says read Building Your Knowledge, which we already did and took notes on, and answer the following questions. Explain how ecosystems differ from a community. Well, if you wrote down what I have on the board, you already have what the difference between an ecosystem and a community is, because ecosystem is all of the things, living and non-living, where community is only us living things. Okay. The next one is explain why you think that in biology we often discuss things in terms of population instead of an individual organism. So I'm hoping that you thought about it, right? But why would we not just pick one organism to research instead of looking at all of it? Can we determine all of our data based on one organism and how it reacts to its environment? I mean, we can just pick one person out of class. Do you think they're a good representation of the entire class? Do you think just because I'm a vegetarian, everybody in my classroom is a vegetarian on an average day? Probably not. Okay, so the more individuals we can add into that data, the more accurate our data is going to be. Okay, so next one. So we did that, so we're on to number 4. Okay, and it says to complete this investigation, you will use resources to research a specific organism. Okay, so that makes sense. We're going to use resources like the internet, okay, to figure out our organism. But first, before we even start researching, we better look up what some of this stuff is. So the first question is, what is bias? Okay, if you ask me about wrestling, opposed to somebody in Manson, I bet I have a very biased opinion because of my background, okay? Meaning I have like preconceived notions about it, okay? So when I'm looking at research, I have to be careful not to look for information that has a bias to it, okay? Things that are not somebody's opinion of stuff, but the actual facts, okay? What types of resources are more likely to be biased? Any organization looking to raise money usually is a little bit more biased. .coms usually a little bit more biased because it's somebody's opinion mixed with the facts. Should biased resources be used in your research? Why or why not? I'm okay with a little bit, but most of your research should be just the facts. Okay, and this was kind of hard because if you looked at my sample, mine was on salmon. It was on sockeye salmon, and it was really hard not to find resources that were looking to have me donate to their cause because they want to help salmon. But at the end of the day, like, I wanted just the facts about their habitat. I didn't want to know the politics behind it. I wanted just the facts. And it was actually a little bit harder. That's why I made sure to add that resource there in case you were having an issue finding unbiased news sources so that you could have something to base your research on. Okay. What printed or online sources are considered reliable? Okay. My rule of thumb is if it comes from a scientific library, so like a university, or if it has a .gov or .org. Those are usually pretty good sources. An example of a reliable source, when we did our COVID-19 research, we used CDC. Okay, there was a couple of people that did not use CDC, and it was super obvious because they had these outrageous claims about how fake it is. And here we are. I'm talking to myself in my classroom. So going on .gov, .org, those kind of sites. How many reliable sources would constitute a good amount of research? This is a hard one because it's infinite. If I could use only as much data as I can, because remember, if I only use one thing, then does that necessarily describe every aspect of what I'm looking into? Okay. But what I thought was reasonable was between 3 and 5, depending on which resources you used. And then why is it important to use multiple resources? To fact check your data. Okay. All right. So then you do your research. You'll need to find 3 to 5 reliable sources to find the answers to the following questions. Please make sure to write down the sources you use in your notebook, and Google is not a reliable source. Okay. What is the organism's habitat? What does your organism depend? How does your organism depend on its habitat? So remember, your habitat is what you wrote down in your notebook. Okay. So your food, your water, your shelter, and space. Okay. So what are the elements that are specific to your organism? So when I did the sockeye salmon, okay, it's freshwater and saltwater. That's part of its initial habitat. It also needs, what else did it need? It needs certain amount of dissolved oxygen in the water, okay? Those are things that it needs for its habitat. So how does your organism depend on its habitat? So why does your organism need it? Okay, well, it needs dissolved oxygen so that it can breathe. It needs water so that it can survive, right? It needs algae so that it has something to eat. Those are all ways that my organism depends on its habitat. How does its habitat meet its needs? So I know my fish has to eat, so what is it eating? It's eating the algae, depending on what state my fish is in. Okay, that's how it's meeting its needs, right? My fish has to be able to breathe. Finding dissolved oxygen is one of the ways that it's meeting its habitat, okay? The habitat is meeting my organism's needs. If I was talking about my moose, I might talk about vegetation, right? So my organism needs vegetation. Why? Because it needs to eat. We know that because that's a basic element of its habitat, okay? So that's A. B, what is the population of your organism? This is just looking for numbers. So your average population size, okay? Does it live alone, right? If I'm talking about my fish, definitely not, okay? How does your organism depend on the population? So with fish, they depend on its population. One of the ways it depends on its population is when it schools, it has a better chance of surviving its predators, right? You see these big schools of fish, and if there's a couple predators, your chances of survival are a lot higher if you're in a big school, because then maybe they're not going to pick you off, okay? So that is B, if I was using my fish example. What is your organism's community? What are 3 ways that your organism depends on its community? Okay, so if I'm talking about sockeye salmon, that's Mr. Amston. So thinking about ways that it depends on its community. Okay, so living things. So I know that, oh, moose, stop. I'll be back.